fragments the high boast that I am a medievalist and not a modern. That is, I really have a notion of why I have collected all the nonsensical things there are. I have not the patience, nor perhaps the constructive intelligence, to state the connecting link between all these chaotic papers. But it could be stated. This row of shapeless and ungainly monsters which I now set before the reader does not consist of separate idols cut out capriciously in lonely valleys or various islands. These monsters are meant for the gargoyles of a definite cathedral. I have to carve the gargoyles because I can carve nothing else. I leave to others the angels and the arches and the spires, but I am very sure of the style of the architecture and of the consecration of the church. Chapter 2. The Surrender of a Cockney. Every man, though he were born in the belfry of Bow and spent his infancy climbing among chimneys, has waiting for him somewhere a country house which he has never seen, but which was built for him in the very shape of his soul. It stands patiently waiting to be found knee deep in orchards of Kent or mirrored in pools of Lincoln, and when the man sees it he remembers it, though he has never seen it before. Even I have been forced to confess this at last, who am a Cockney, if ever there was one. A Cockney not only in principle, but with savage pride. I have always maintained quite seriously that the Lord is not in the wind or the thunder of the waste, but if anywhere in the still small voice of Fleet Street. I sincerely maintain that nature worship is more morally dangerous than the most vulgar man worship of the cities, since it can easily be perverted into the worship of an impersonal mystery, carelessness, or cruelty. Thoreau would have been a jollier fellow if he had devoted himself to a greengrocer instead of to greens. Swinburne would have been a better moralist if he had worshipped the fishmonger instead of worshipping the sea. I prefer the philosophy of bricks and mortar to the philosophy of turnips. To call a man a turnip may be playful, but it is seldom respectful. But when we wish to pay emphatic honour to a man, to praise the firmness of his nature, the squareness of his conduct, the strong humility with which he is interlocked with his equals in silent mutual support, then we invoke the nobler Cockney metaphor and call him a brick. But despite all these theories I have surrendered. I have struck my colours at sight, at a mere glimpse through the opening of a hedge. I shall come down to living in the country like any common Socialist or simpler lifer. I shall end my days in a village, in the character of the village idiot, and be a spectacle and a judgment to mankind. I have already learnt the rustic manner of leaning upon a gate, and I was thus gymnastically occupied at the moment when my eye caught the house that was made for me. It stood well back from the road and was built of good yellow brick. It was narrow for its height, like the tower of some border robber, and over the front door was carved in large letters, 1908. That last burst of sincerity, that superb scorn of antiquarian sentiment, overwhelmed me finally. I closed my eyes in a kind of ecstasy. My friend, who was helping me lean on the gate, asked me with some curiosity what I was doing. "My dear fellow," I said with emotion, "I am bidding farewell to 43 hansom cabsmen." "Well," he said, "I suppose they would think this country rather outside the radius." "Oh, my friend," I cried brokenly, "how beautiful London is! Why do they only write poetry about the country? I could turn every lyric cry into Cockney. My heart leaps up when I behold the A sky sign in the sky." As I observed in a volume which is too little read, founded on the older English poets, you never saw my golden treasury regilded, or the classics made Cockney. It contains some fine lines. "O wild West End, thou breath of London's being," or the reminiscences of Keats beginning, "City of smuts and mellow fogfulness." I have written many such lines on the beauty of London, yet I never realized that London was really beautiful till now. Do you ask me why? It is because I have left it forever. If you will take my advice, said my friend, you will humbly endeavour not to be a fool. What is the sense of this mad modern notion that every literary man must live in the country with pigs and the donkeys and the squires? Chaucer and Spenser and Milton and Dryden lived in London. Shakespeare and Dr. Johnson came to London because they had quite enough of the country. And as for trumpery topical journalists like you, why, they would cut their throats in the country. You have confessed it yourself in your own last words. You hunger and thirst after the streets. You think London the finest place on the planet. And if by some miracle a Bayswater omnibus could come down this green country lane, you would utter a yell of joy. Then a light burst upon my brain, and I turned upon him with terrible sternness. "Why, miserable aesthete," I said in a voice of thunder, "that is the true country spirit. That is how the real rustic feels. The real rustic does utter a yell of joy at the sight of Bayswater omnibus. The real rustic does think London the finest place on the planet. In the few moments that I have stood by this stile I have grown rooted here like an ancient tree. I have been here for ages. Petulant suburban, I am the real rustic. I believe that the streets of London are paved with gold, and I mean to see it before I die." The evening breeze freshened among the little tossing trees of that lane, and the purple evening clouds piled up and darkened behind my country seat, the house that belonged to me, making, by contrast, its yellow bricks gleam like gold. At last my friend said, "To cut it short, then, you mean that you will live in the country because you won't like it? What on earth will you do here? Dig up the garden?" "Dig," I answered in honourable scorn. "Dig, do work at my country seat. No, thank you. When I find a country seat I sit in it. And for your other objections, you are quite wrong. I do not dislike the country, but I like the town more. Therefore the art of happiness certainly suggests that I should live in the country and think about the town. Modern nature worship is all upside down. Trees and fields ought to be the ordinary things. Terraces and temples ought to be extraordinary. I am on the side of the man who lives in the country and wants to go to London. I abominate and abjure the man who lives in London and wants to go to the country. I do it with all the more heartiness because I am that sort of man myself. We must learn to love London again as a rustic loves it. Therefore," I quote again from the great Cockney version of the Golden Treasury, "therefore, ye gas pipes, ye asbestos stoves, forbid not any severing of our loves. I have relinquished but your earthly sight, to hold you dear in a more distant way. I'll love the busses lumbering through the wet, even more than when I lightly tripped as they. The grimy colour of the London clay is lovely yet. Because I have found the house where I was really born, the tall and quiet house from which I can see London afar off as the miracle of man that it is." The Nightmare. A sunset of copper and gold has just broken down and gone to pieces in the west, and grey colours were crawling over everything in earth and heaven. Also a wind was growing, a wind that laid cold finger upon the flesh and spirit. The bushes at the back of my garden began to whisper like conspirators, and then to wave like wild hands in signal. I was trying to read by the last light that died on the lawn a long poem of the decadent period, a poem about the old gods of Babylon and Egypt, about their blazing and obscene temples, their cruel and colossal faces. "Oh, didst thou love the god of flies who plagued the Hebrews, and was splashed with wine unto the waist, or Pasht, who had green beryls for her eyes?" I read this poem because I had to review it for the Daily News. Still, it was genuine poetry of its kind. It really gave out an atmosphere, a fragrant and suffocating smoke that seemed really to come from the bondage of Egypt or the burden of Tyre. There is not much in common, thank God, between my garden with the grey-green English sky beyond it, and these mad visions of painted palaces